What's going on, guys? K-Pine here and welcome back. And in this video I'll be featuring what might possibly be the strongest team you could run in the Fossil Cup. Shadow Poliwrath on the lead, Shadow Quagsire as the safe swap, and Ferrothorn as the closer. In 4 days with this team, I gained over 400 elo, going from the mid 2700s into the upper 3100s and well onto the global leaderboards. Shadow Poly is interchangeable with the regular Poly, but I prefer the Shadow for the Escav matchup and the added fast move pressure. I'm also running Scald in these battles, throw on Dynamic Punch, it's just purely better in this cup. I'm just trying to save charge TMs. As for the Shadow Quagsire, it's absolutely not interchangeable. It has to be the Shadow, as that actually allows you to win the 2-shield scenario against a Ferrothorn Counter-Swap. Yeah, you heard that right, Ferrothorn. And alignment goes a very long way in this cup. Because of how insanely strong this team is, instead of me showing you just 2 good back-to-back sets, I'll be showing you different scenarios and common matchups you'll come across and how to play them. And with that, let's get right into the battles. Alright, against the first battle, we lead Shadow Poliwrath into Lanturn. Terrible lead for us, we are going to swap into that Shadow Quagsire, and they bring in a Ferrothorn. And this is that matchup I was talking about, where with that Mudshot head start you get by safe swapping the Quagsire, you are actually able to win the 2-shield scenario here, as long as you're throwing on good timing, so just make sure you are throwing on good timing. Now, you actually do kind of prefer a little bit of an attack stat on your Shadow Quagsire just for this specific matchup, because if there is a very defensively weighted Ferrothorn, they can actually reach a bulk point against your Mudshots, so your Mudshots only do 2 damage against them instead of 3, that now lets the Ferrothorn win the 2-shield scenario. So even if you have an all stat product Quagsire with no attack, you can still get that attack breakpoint as long as they don't have a really high ranked Ferrothorn. But if you have a Quagsire that has a little bit of an attack stat, it gives you a lot more leeway in that regard, and the only way for them to actually get that bulk point is to have an extremely defensively weighted Ferrothorn by giving up both HP and attack to boost that defense. But like I said, if you don't have it, it's not end all be all. But in this matchup, they did not have a high enough bulk point on their Ferrothorn, so my Shadow Quagsire was able to flip the 2 shields. But unfortunately, it's a Mantine in the back, so my Poliwrath has nowhere to go. So I'm just going to sack it and rely on my Ferrothorn to sweep this game. We get a very nice farm down of the Lanturn, and we do leave with that Thunder, which will take care of that Mantine as we take this game. GG's. Next battle, we lead Shadow Poliwrath into Quagsire. This is one matchup where you'll see why Dynamic Punch is drastically preferred on the Shadow Poly over Scald. The Quagsire will fire off their move first. This is most likely the Mud Bomb, which it is, and we're going to load up and fire off the Scald on this CMP tied to their next Mud Bomb. And if they have a high enough ranked Quagsire, as you'll see, they are able to hold on, and that Scald does not KO. Dynamic Punch, however, does do just slightly more damage than Scald, so Dynamic Punch would have KO'd that Quagsire, and I would have left with a fairly healthy Poliwrath there and not had to take that next Mud Bomb. They come in with Lanturn, so I pivot Shadow Quagsire. They swap out of that Lanturn matchup into their Escav, and the second they did that, this matchup is now over, because I have my Ferrothorn for the Lanturn, and my Shadow Quagsire will be able to take care of this Escav. Shadow Quagsire does beat Escav in the 2-shield scenario straight Mud Bomb as well. So if they call one of your first Mud Bombs, you can just continue going for the Mud Bombs and then eventually fast move them down. Or if they shield both of your Mud Bombs like they do here, you can go for the Stone Edge and take them out. And at that moment, my opponent realizes the match is over, so they concede. GG's. Next battle, amazing lead with the Shadow Magnezone, but pay attention to this right here. You have to be extremely quick on their swap into your Ferrothorn when they swap a Jellicent. So just 1 counter from your Shadow Poliwrath, swap into your Ferrothorn, and then throw your Power Whip right away. By throwing your Power Whip right away, that allows you to take advantage of your desynced fast moves to not let them deny you of an extra Bullet Seed, and instead to allow you to deny them of an extra Hex. So make sure only after one counter you swap, and then you swap into your Ferrothorn and throw first, because by doing that, you can actually, after landing that Power Whip, you can Bullet Seed that Jellicent down all the way. They will reach a Shadow Ball, and they will reach a Surf, but they will not reach a second Shadow Ball. If you play it like that, that's going to be the outcome every single time, and it puts you in a fantastic position. As you'll see here, my Ferrothorn was able to land a Power Whip onto that Shadow Magnezone, as well as get a shield from them. So now I could pivot Quag, they come in Mantine, and this game's just over. Because the Mudshot damage that Magnezone took means it will go down in one counter range, even though they have back-to-back moves stored. They're only going to be able to get one of them off, and Quagsire, after landing a Stone Edge, is just game over. So as long as I save a single shield for my Shadow Poliwrath, there's nothing my opponent can do. So I will shield the first Aerial Ace. I will tank the second Aerial Ace, just because this will do far less damage than a Shadow Wild Charge for the Magnezone. Which, here it comes. The counter goes through. They bait, doesn't matter. The counter does KO. And we do a little cheeky, unnecessary swap into our Pharaoh there. But down the Magnezone goes, and my opponent concedes. GG's. Next battle, Ferrothorn Lead. They swap into a Lanturn, and I counter-swap with my Ferrothorn. And this game right here is a good example of what not to do. On a Ferrothorn Lead or an Escav Lead, if they safe swap out of that matchup into a Lanturn, 99 out of 100 times their third Pokemon is going to be a Jellicent, and they're trying to bait out that Ferrothorn. I kind of just saw water, kind of reactionary swapped into my Pharaoh. You're always going to want to come in your Shadow Quagsire here. If you come in with your Shadow Quagsire, this matchup will just be hard RPS for you and an easy win, because you'll have your Ferrothorn for their Jellicent. But now, since I wasted my Ferrothorn on the Lanturn, my Shadow Quagsire is going to have to go up against the Jellicent, and that's a fairly neutral matchup here. Let alone, I'm going to have to give up a shield on my Poliwrath to the Power Whip from the Ferrothorn. So now the Jellicent's going to have a shield advantage to most likely sweep my back line. So if you just come in Quagsire here, it's against the Lanturn, it's an easy win. But if you see the Pharaoh or the Escav Lead and they safe swap the Jellicent, not the Lanturn, then no worries. You'll just play it out exactly like how I explained in the last battle, immediately counter swapping in your Ferrothorn and throwing the Power Whip right away. As you'll see, it is that Jellicent, and now this is going to be an uphill battle. I stay in to chip it with an Icy Wind, and my opponent doesn't know what I have in the back yet, so I'm hoping that the second Icy Wind will garner a shield from them, because they're afraid of my third Pokemon having fast move pressure, but they know better than that. They let it go. If they showed it that Icy Wind, I would say I have actually still a pretty decent shot to win this match, but because they no-shielded that Icy Wind, it's going to be an extremely tough match. Here, I throw... The Ferrothorn has the move right now. I could have thrown one more Mud Shot before I threw the Mud Bomb to take off the Ferrothorn, which would be nice because, you know, I have extra energy there, but we'll see if that makes a difference in this matchup. I do call the Surf that the Jelly throws, and now I'm going to fire off a Mud Bomb against it. That will get their final shield, and now I'm going to bring in my Shadow Poliwrath, and here I need to hope they're not at the back-to-back moves. They can fire off one Surf, and they are. My Shadow Poly falls just short of getting enough energy for the Icy Wind. Now back in comes my Quagsire, and fortunately it looked like that Mud Shot didn't make a difference, but you always want to bring in that Shadow Quagsire here. And here's an example of basically the same exact team, but how it goes when you play it out right. They swap in that Lanturn, I bring in that Quagsire, and Lanturn can't do anything. We're going to fire off this Mud Bomb right away. It's going to do massive damage to the Lanturn. They get to land a Surf in return. Shadow Quag just shrugs that off. And now we get to load up some energy and fire off our next Mud Bomb on the CMP tie to their next Surf. We don't want to tank their next Surf by over farming. We just want to get rid of it and leave our Quagsire fairly healthy, because once they bring in that Ferrothorn or that Escav, they're not really going to be able to farm down. The Ferrothorn can farm down, but I will be able to get off 2 moves from my Quagsire if they try and do that, which they do. So I get some very, very nice chip damage here. So that Mud Bomb will land, and now I'm gonna bring in my Poliwrath. I will shield once with a Power Whip just because it does so much damage to the Poly. And if it's that Jellicent in the back like we're expecting, we can just swap our Pharaoh immediately. I planned on them swapping out, so I didn't even throw a counter to see them swap and then go to my Pharaoh. It was kind of a given they were immediately gonna swap into their Jellicent. So I just come into my own Ferrothorn right away, and this game is over even though they have a shield advantage here. Another thing you could do is just stay in with your Poly when they swap into their Jellicent, and then you can Icy Wind the Jelly. And once you Icy Wind the Jelly, Pharaoh can now actually survive 2 Shadow Balls. But also swapping right away like I did there and not giving up any free turns or energy to the Jelly does put you in a good spot as well. As down goes the Jelly. And now I can just reach this Power Whip before their Pharaoh is able to do anything. And we're able to take this one. GG's. So notice how a lot more smooth and cleaner of gameplay it is by bringing the Shadow Quag in there. Next battle. Shadow Poliwrath into Escav. Now this is kind of a unique matchup. If the Escav is on Drill Run and Acid Spray, you can actually counter it down all the way. You shield once to respect the Drill Run. They're most likely gonna bait. It is the Acid Spray. So because they're on Acid Spray, we get to counter all the way down, leave with all this energy. And I'm not gonna throw a counter here just in case it is a Lanturn. I'm gonna see what it is that they come in with. It is a Jelly, so I'm gonna pivot the Quagsire. And if they swap out of this matchup, I've just won this game on the spot. And if they stay in, they still have a chance depending on what they have in the back. But my Shadow Poliwrath is loaded with all that energy, so it would be extremely, extremely tough for them to take it. So that's how the lead plays out if the Escav is on Acid Spray. If the Escav is on Aerial Ace and Drill Run, you will shield their Aerial Ace, and you'll actually need to fire off an Icy Wind, one fast move before they reach their next Aerial Ace, because you lose CMP tie. You don't want to play to the CMP tie. So you will fire off that Icy Wind, one fast move before their next Aerial Ace, and that will take them out unless they give up a shield. If they give up a shield, then you want to give up your second shield in return and counter down, and then based off what they come in, see if you want to pivot into the Quagsire or just stay in with the Poliwrath. Now in this matchup, we are able to get rid of the Jelly. In comes the Registeel that they have in the back. It's not another water type, it is a Registeel. Focus Blast lands, does massive damage, but Registeel's not going to save them here. All we need to do is just save the shield for our Shadow Poly, and we're in a great spot. We land the Thunder, we land a Power Whip. We didn't even need to land this Power Whip to win this match, but we'll take it, because we can just get to the back-to-back Icy Winds and the game's over. We could even counter down if we wanted to, but back-to-back Icy Winds is a little quicker, more efficient, and just a tad safer. So first Icy Wind will get the shield, and we get to the second Icy Wind to take out the Registeel. GG's. Next battle, we lead Shadow Poly into Shadow Poly. Now, if it's a Shadow Poly lead, I don't even bother building up to the Skull to buff a potential Dynamic Punch. You just want to go for the Icy Wind right away. Reason being, if your opponent no shields an Icy Wind, then you win this lead matchup. So you can shield whatever it is, whether it's the Dynamic Punch of their own Icy Wind bait, it doesn't matter. You'll be able to counter down before a second move is reached, and you can take switch advantage, where, as you'll see, they come in with a Jellicent there. They pivot out of the Jellicent because they have a great answer for the Quagsire and their Ferrothorn. But by doing so, as I mentioned earlier, they're just going to lose the match now, because I have the Ferrothorn for their Jellicent, and my Poly is still alive to handle this Pharaoh. I will come in with Poly here and look for the counter down. If I can't get it, I plan on firing off the Icy Wind to the CMP tie. But I think I got the 1-turn lag on the bring in there when I brought in my Poly, and I didn't want to risk not getting that CMP tie because of the lag. So I throw in a little bit of suboptimal timing, but it ends up being fine because they do have that jelly, which we saw earlier that they swapped out of. And we get that Icy Wind debuff, and like I mentioned, if you Icy Wind debuff a Jellicent, you can actually survive the hexes plus 2 Shadow Balls. So as you'll see here, we do shield the first move, which is the Shadow Ball, and now we get to fire off this Power Whip at it. Power Whip will get their first shield. Now we load up on some extra energy, get to the back-to-back whips. As you'll see here, we already took 1 Shadow Ball. We can tank the second one, and we get to the back-to-back Power Whips here, as this one will get their final shield, and the second one will land for the knockout. GG's. You'll see that Power Whip is enough to take out the jelly. Next battle, we lead Shadow Poly into Lanturn. Terrible lead. We are going to swap into that Shadow Quagsire. They meet it with an Escav. And like I mentioned earlier in the beginning of the match, in this video, Shadow Quagsire does win the 2 shield scenario against Escav as well, straight Mud Bomb. And here my opponent calls the Mud Bomb, so that just means I'm going to continue going for Mud Bombs myself, where this Mud Bomb will get their first shield. They're able to get my second shield with their Aerial Ace. And then here, I'm actually not going to fire off this next Mud Bomb. I'm just going to go for the full Mud Shot down, which I will get. And down goes the Escav. So now we have switch advantage and are able to put our Ferrothorn onto their Lanturn, which is amazing. But my opponent makes a really interesting decision. They come in with their Lanturn here just to soak all this energy that the Quagsire has, and essentially just sack their Lanturn. So they're putting it all on their third Pokemon, which is a Force Palm Lucario. And bad news for them, we are able to get to yet another Mud Bomb, force their final shield, and come in my Poly. And this is just game over. Doesn't matter if they're on Power Up Punch, Thunder Punch, Power Up Punch, Shadow Ball, Thunder Punch, Shadow Ball, whatever it is, we have this game won. Because we can bring in our Pharaoh and we can outpace the Power Whip before they reach a Shadow Ball. But they throw out 4. Is this the only Lucario in existence on Thunder Punch and Blaze Kick? It is, but our Shadow Poly is still able to KO the Lucario with that counter, and that matchup was a lot closer than I thought it would be. GG's. Next battle, another Lanturn lead. We swap into our Shadow Quagsire, and this right here is going to showcase the power of the Shadow Quagsire safe swap. We are able to survive those Razor Leafs to make it to a Stone Edge, and my opponent actually respects it. A little bit of an interesting shield, but I think they're just counting on the fast move beatdown of the Razor Leafs. So I'm actually going to come in my Ferrothorn here. If that Stone Edge landed, I would have had to see how much damage it did if I wanted to come in Poly or not, but I probably still would have come in Ferrothorn regardless. But now this is a little bit annoying because even though these Razor Leafs are double resisted, I can't over farm as much as I want to just because they are running Ice Beam onto their Ludicolo. So we do take 2 power-ups, take it out. We hard swap back into our Poly here because we know it's the Lanturn, and we want to deal with we want an energy lead to possibly deal with the Lanturn. And this right here is another reason why you want Dynamic Punch. I can only hit this Lanturn for resisted damage, where if I had Dynamic Punch, I could hit it for stab, neutral damage that packs a punch, literally. And here, this half health Lanturn is actually in Dynamic Punch range. So if I'm running Dynamic Punch, I will win this match. If it was Dynamic Punch, that would just about KO the Lanturn. So my Poly would still be alive to deal some pretty significant counter damage to the Ferrothorn. And I feel like I think I would outpace to a Icy Wind before they reached a move, and then that would just be game over. But because I'm running Scald, we're not able to KO the Lanturn, and their Ferrothorn will just take this one. GG's. Next battle, we lead Shadow Poly into Mantine. Terrible lead. We're going to swap into our own Shadow Quag right away. Most of the times when facing a Mantine lead, they'll have a Ferrothorn behind it. They'll bring in the Ferrothorn, you'll take switch, and now you get your own Ferro on their Mantine, which is pretty good. But here, my opponent makes a very interesting but very smart play. They chip the Quagsire first with the Mantine before bringing in their Ferro, because this guarantees they don't have to give up a shield, and they can keep switch advantage. So that was a very smart play by my opponent there, recognizing that, hey, Shadow Quag does win the 2-shield scenario against it. But what I can do instead is I can bring in my Poly, shield this Power Whip, counter down their Ferro, and rely on a healthy Poly plus a Ferro to sweep this endgame. I have a decent shot as long as it's not a counter user, and my opponent's staying with the Mantine, so it seems like it is not a counter user in the back. So we're gonna try our best here, play this out, see what we can do. And if they're staying in against the Ferrothorn, I'm expecting them to respect the Thunder, so we go for the Power Whip bait to save us a bullet seed's worth of energy, and it does work. We tank the first Aerial Ace, and now these wing attacks are starting to add up, so we will shield the second Aerial Ace. And now we overfarm here. We plan to go for another bait, and my opponent catches the Thunder. Oh no, onto a Quagsire. No, we go for the Power Whip, and we actually undercharge it because we want energy on our Poliwrath. We want to move stored on our Ferrothorn to take out that Mantine, and then we want to get an energy head start on our Poliwrath. As you'll see here, that energy will allow us to get to an Icy Wind to debuff this Mantine and make it so I'm no longer in range of wing attacks plus an Aerial Ace. So they will fire off the Aerial Ace. As you'll see, we do survive it, and we will be able to reach another Icy Wind before they wing attack us down, which is massive because this guarantees their final shield. And by guaranteeing their final shield, we have now won this game because we have a move stored on our Ferro, which wins CMP. But it doesn't even matter as Poly is able to get the counter down. GG's. The Fossil Cup has a tendency to be an extremely RPS meta, so I tried to build something with a little more neutral play to combat that. So this is what I whipped up, and boy has it put in work. At the time I'm making this video, the Fossil Cup is still around for another week, so I highly recommend giving this team a try if you're looking to solidify one in. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate you. If you enjoyed it, please drop a like, subscribe, and comment down below. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.